Hi, everyone. Our topic today is winter celebrations in Russia. Before I get into that, I want to say, if you have been following my channel for a while, you definitely noticed that I haven't posted anything in the last several months. And the reason for it is that I was going through, some kind of a midlife crisis. And you might wonder why I'm bringing up here today, but stick around with this video and you will find out how Russian winter celebrations and the midlife crisis are actually very closely connected in the Russian culture.
If you like it, please click like. If it's useful, drop a line. If you love it, hit subscribe. Like me, подпишись и комментарий напиши.
Okay, let's get into it. So our topic today is winter celebrations in Russia. And when I ask my students what the biggest winter celebration is for them here in the United States, of course, the answer of them for most of them is Christmas. But in Russia, or in the Russian culture, the biggest winter celebration is actually New Year. And New Year in Russia is celebrated on the same dates as it is here, so it's on the night from December 31st to January 1st. However, this tradition is not actually that old by historical standards. It really only became established about 300 years ago at the beginning of the 18th century. And when I teach this course, and I teach my course in the fall semester, the topic of winter celebrations is usually the last lecture of the semester. And by that point, my students already know enough about Russian history and about Russian life. So when I ask them the question, can you guys guess which Russian ruler introduced the New Year celebration as we know it today? They usually answer correctly pretty fast that it was Peter the Great. And Peter the Great is the person who really brought the New Year celebrations into Russian life as we know it. So something that's very familiar for us today. And Peter the Great was a unique ruler in the Russian history. He was very charismatic and he was famous historically for modernizing pretty much everything he could in Russia. Like every area of life you can think of, he definitely tried modernizing it. And as I said, he was very charismatic, very unusual personality for his time, and he was constantly pushing the country towards changes. So in one of those changes was introducing the celebration of the New Year alongside Christmas. So in Imperial Russia, both New Year and Christmas were celebrated. Now, after Peter the Great passed away, the celebrations of the New Year as we know it, so on that night from December 31st to January 1st, and having like a Christmas tree or New Year's tree kind of was forgotten for a while because people were like, oh, finally we can just like go back to how it was. But then little by little, they started missing these traditions and they were reintroduced. So as I said, in the Imperial Russia, we have people celebrating both Christmas and New Year. Now, then we have a period of time in the Russian history that is aligned with the Soviet time when Christmas was banned. And after the 1917 revolution, that is called the Bolshevik Revolution or the Red Revolution, Christmas was banned because it was a religious holiday and Bolsheviks really had, they were materialistic and they really had a lot of trouble accepting the religion. Then there were other reasons, especially connected to the Russian history for that, and which I explain in more detail in some of my lectures that I think will still be posted. But for our purposes, the key point is actually very simple. People stopped celebrating Christmas during the Soviet time. And to be honest, for a while, they actually didn't celebrate the New Year either, because after the 1917 revolution, the country was in this enormous turmoil. There was a civil war, and the new Soviet state was trying to establish itself and figure out how it would function. So there was actually very little time or space for celebrations at this time. But around mid-30s, New Year was officially brought back. And actually, it was one of the Stalin's orders to bring back that New Year celebration. And if you know a little bit about the Russian history, the 30s or mid-30s in the Soviet Russia were a time of really terrible political terror. And probably they were trying to offset this somehow with like these fun celebrations. But the main thing is that when the government ordered something, like it did here, like let's start celebrating New Year and develop the traditions, everybody was doing it basically in one big wave at the same time. So the New Year's traditions like kind of disappeared in the mid-30s and the like spread throughout the culture and the country very fast because it was the order of the government. So starting from the mid-30s, the New Year became the major winter holiday again, and that's basically what we see in Russia up to this point. Now, the modern Russia, so after the Soviet Union fell apart, celebrates both New Year and Christmas, but they're not equal in terms of importance. As I mentioned before, the biggest winter celebration for Russia or Russian-speaking cultures is actually New Year, and Christmas is much quieter. So on Christmas, people still say something like Merry Christmas, с Рождеством, and they wish each other something good, something like peace and happiness, but it's not as emotionally charged season as it is here in the United States. So here in the United States, people are very much into the Christmas spirit and waiting for Christmas. In Russia, it's the New Year's spirit and people are waiting for the New Year. Now, before we move on to some traditions, another interesting kind of like historical and like current detail about the Russian Christmas. So most Russians are Orthodox Christians, and the Russian Orthodox Church celebrates Christmas on January 7th. So Christmas Eve is January 6th, and the Christmas Day is January 7th, not December 25th. And that actually has to do with the differences in calendars. So the church follows the old Julian calendar. So when the Bolsheviks switched to the Gregorian calendar shortly after the revolution, remember how I said there was tension between the Bolsheviks and church? Church did not. So church stayed true to the Julian calendar, which is about 13 days behind. Now, this calendar switch and differences are more difficult or more complex than how I'm explaining it here. But for us, the most important thing that it's approximately 13 days off. So when we talk Christmas here, one character immediately comes to mind. That's Santa Claus. In Russia, we also have a character kind of like connected with this bringing gifts on New Year, not Christmas. And that character is Ded Moroz, or Grandfather Frost. And Grandfather Frost has been a folklore figure, for centuries. And actually, the Ded Moroz folklore character is not as nice as the modern Ded Moroz. He was more of a like tough, punishing spirit. But right now we're going with that kind of like Soviet version of the Ded Moroz, which is, this older man with a long white beard. He wears a long fur coat that can be red or blue. He carries a staff in his hand, and he's kind of like this nice grandfatherly figure for the Russian winter celebrations. And he's the one who brings gifts on the New Year's Eve. So Russian kids get gifts on New Year, not on Christmas. Now, another interesting thing, kind of like the difference from Santa Claus, is that the Ded Moroz actually has an official residence in Russia, in the city of Великий Устюг, which is located in the European part of Russia. And Великий Устюг is one of these old historical Russian cities. So kind of like we have like folklore connecting with geography. And basically the idea is that Russian kids can go and visit the Russian Ded Moroz if they go to his residence in Великий Устюг. Now, it became a major tourist attraction for children for many years, and it's a new thing, so it's like connected to modern Russia. But I think I read last year that the residence was actually closed. Maybe it will reopen, but definitely, a fun tradition to have because, kids don't have to like think about like, how do I get to the North Pole? No, it's a city in Russia that you can take the train to or drive to. Now, another important difference is that the Russian Ded Moroz never comes alone. He always comes with his granddaughter, Snegurочка, and her name literally means snow girl or snow maiden in English. And she's his she's his granddaughter and his assistant. They always appear together. And one of the explanations that I've read is that when the Soviet government was kind of like reinstating these New Year's traditions, kids already kind of like weren't aware who Ded Moroz is, and seeing this big old man with the long beard was a little bit frightening. So they introduced the character of Snegurочка to kind of like bridge this gap between this older man and younger kids. So Snegurочка always comes with Ded Moroz for the celebrations. And I think it's really cool that her name is actually connected to snow, because when I asked my students, at the beginning of my course, like, what do they associate Russia with? And a lot of the times they associate Russia with snow. And, Russia is huge. It has 11 time zones, so there are very different climatic regions. But I thought it was interesting that the most famous female character in the Russian folklore actually does have the word snow in her name. So another interesting thing that here, the Santa Claus has helpers, and that's elves. And in Russian traditions, like the Ded Moroz usually didn't have any helpers, but in the modern Russia, a new kind of like theory was introduced based on a popular Russian book series, which basically imagines Ded Moroz as the head of like a snow team. So it's Ded Moroz and Snegurочка and a team of snowmen, snow women, snow creatures that help Ded Moroz throughout the year to create presents and bring the celebrations to the kids. Okay, now let's switch to talking about decorations. And I think one of the most interesting differences between American and Russian cultures when it comes to New Year's or Christmas decorations is who is mainly responsible for creating this holiday atmosphere. So here in the United States, Christmas decorations are very much a residential thing, meaning people themselves put a lot of effort into decorating their own houses with light displays and inflatable, figures and ornaments, everything, that creates this Christmas spirit. And I love it how like entire neighborhoods sometimes turn into these amazing holidays displays and showcases. Now in Russia, it's a little bit different because most people live in apartments. Holiday decorations are actually more of a municipal project. So the cities are the ones who take the responsibility for creating this festive atmosphere. And it became especially important in the last several years, where big cities put a lot of money into really creating this New Year's atmosphere around the winter holidays. So you have big cities covered in lights and decorations, in some large-scale art displays in public spaces. So the celebration in Russia really happens outside in the city itself. And of course, people decorate their own houses, but I would just say the scale is very different. Now, actually, let me show you little bits and pieces of this video, and I will link it in the description. I cannot show like another YouTube video as part of my video, but I just want to show you like some images of Moscow during the winter celebrations. As you can see, there are lights everywhere and beautiful installations, and streets are illuminated. So it creates this kind of like magical feelings. And here you can also see the ice skating rink in one of the most famous spots in Russia, the Red Square. And it's really beautiful, and the city is really trying to create this kind of like fun atmosphere for during the winter. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about other winter celebration traditions. Now, when it comes to decorating the Christmas tree, or in Russia we call it Новогодняя ёлка, New Year's tree, things are actually very similar. We decorate with the tree with ornaments and toys and lights. So in that sense, there is actually not much difference. Another similar thing is that both here in the United States and in Russia, we have a number of movies that are considered holiday movies or New Year movies. So movies that people watch every every year as part of the tradition. Now, a very interesting thing is that in Russia, we can actually name the movie for the New Year celebration. And that movie is called The Irony of Fate or Enjoy Your Bath. Ирония судьбы или С легким паром. Now, remember when I started this video, I actually mentioned my own midlife crisis, and I said that winter celebrations and the midlife crisis are somehow connected. So here is where I'm explaining it finally. So this movie is actually the connection. And this movie is watched by millions of people every single year. It became a tradition. Now, it's a Soviet movie, but it really became a tradition starting from like the 90s to show this movie a lot. And it really very fast became the tradition to watch it every year. And very often it's just playing in the background. It's not like people are like sitting and watching it. And it's usually played in the background when people or women, Russian women, are chopping vegetables for the, or preparing the New Year's feast. And I would say just having this movie on is already part of the celebration. And I've seen this movie multiple times. And when I was a kid, like it is presented as a comedy. And you kind of like watch it, and as a kid, I was thinking, like, it's really not that funny. And I couldn't quite understand why are people watching it every year. It really didn't make much sense to me. But when I grew older and started watching it as an adult, and especially coming close to the age of the characters in this movie, I suddenly understood why that movie is so important and so beloved. It actually really is a movie about a midlife crisis. And before I go into that, I just want to emphasize that New Year's Eve or New Year's night is a very special night in the Russian mindset and culture. It's a moment of reflection about your life, about your choices, what went wrong, and what could still change for the better. And that movie fits that spirit really perfectly. And because it kind of like shows people kind of like pondering about all these questions. So once again, the New Year's night is the night when Russian people genuinely hope, like really, really hope that something good will happen and will happening throughout the coming year. To be honest, it actually is very hard to explain how strong the desire of the Russian people or people who share the Russian-speaking culture is for that new beginning. So as you know, life in Russia has never been easy, historically speaking. So the new year basically started carrying this deep emotional weight of sense, like maybe this time, maybe this year, things will be different. Okay, all right, talking too much, but back to the movie. So as I said, in The Irony of Fate, that movie, The Irony of Fate, is officially presented as a comedy, but in reality, it's much closer to, I would say, a melodrama. So the two main characters, Zhenya, a man from Moscow, and Nadia, a woman from Leningrad, which is the old name for St. Petersburg, meet in a very unexpected way on New Year's Eve. I'm not going to be giving you any spoilers, but it's a very interesting premise. And after they meet, both of them are forced to take a very honest look at their own lives and ask some uncomfortable questions like, am I living the right life? Am I with the right person? Now, what's important to mention is that both of them are already in stable, solid relationships at the time of their meeting, and their partners are very reliable, reasonable, and socially appropriate. But we can see in the movie that those relationships lack passion, lack what we would call true love. And I think that's also where cultural differences with the American cultures into play. Now, on my channel, I actually have a couple of lectures about love in the Russian mindset and how it's different from, kind of like more Western love mindset. And I talk about it in more detail, but very briefly, I would say if I had to summarize it, in the US, relationships often feel more pragmatic. You even have the word match, like where people see if they match. And that process can take a long time. That's why here in this culture, you have those slow burn relationships. You have people dating multiple years. You have this long engagements. And it's all very, very normal here. because it's the mindset. But in the Russian mindset, it actually is quite the opposite. Like we don't even have a good concept for matching, but the idea what we have is the connection. The connection kind of like зацепиться, цепляться, like a chain. You create a chain, you meet, you feel something intense, you fall in love, and then you begin that everything else can be figured out later. It will just fall into place somehow. I'm not saying that one way is better than another, but this is the reason why relationships in Russian tend to move faster and feel much more kind of like emotionally charged. And so once again, in this movie, we see two people who already have chosen stability over passion. And over the course of the story, a big part of the movie is about them trying to decide whether it's worth risking everything stable and predictable, what they have. And again, when you're young, you kind of can, bounce between the two. But when you reach your kind of like your mid-30s, these questions become more intense. Like, what do you choose? So here they are trying to decide, like, do they give all of it up for a chance to be truly happy? And I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but I would say you definitely should watch it. Not only because it's a classic, which it is, but also because it's this incredibly important cultural context for understanding the Russian mindset. And actually, if you have seen it, please drop a comment with your thoughts. I would really like to know how it felt to you, how this movie felt to you. Okay, now let's continue with a few more New Year's traditions. So there's a very popular New Year's TV show that is called Голубой огонек, literally the little blue light. And it features famous Russian singers, actors, and comedians. And of course, they sing, dance, and sometimes do comedy sketches. And for many families, it's just basically background noise, but a very comforting one because it's just a tradition to have the Голубой огонек on TV on the New Year's night. Now, another interesting key tradition is the New Year's presidential address. Right before midnight, the president addresses the nation, and usually with the Moscow Kremlin in the background. And this tradition has been in place for many decades. And a very interesting thing, and you probably see it on the slide too, that in 1989, so when the country was going through what we call perestroika, which eventually led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And it's a very interesting period of time in the Russian history. But that was the time when Soviet Union at this time was opening up to the world. It was trying to become more transparent, more liberal, more open. In that year, Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan addressed the Russian people together during this New Year's address. So that was a very interesting, I think, fun fact about the Russian presidential address. Okay, so then just before midnight, so after the president is done with his speech, everyone is listening to the Kremlin bells, and they're called in Russian kuranты. So when the bells finish ringing and the national anthem begins, that is officially the start of the new year. So you guys here in the United States, you have the ball drop. In New York, in Russia, you have the presidential address and the Kremlin's bells, or kuranты. And to be honest, that moment right there is kind of like the emotional peak of the whole New Year's night. So now what also is happening on the New Year night is that gifts are exchanged at midnight, and children usually stay up, even very young children. And that's completely normal because New Year, as I said, is the holiday. It matters to the Russian people who they're with, what they're doing, and how they welcome the new year. So, of course, everyone you love is supposed to be right there with you so that they're with you in the new year. That's why kids stay up. We were staying up, me and my friends staying up. I think always, it doesn't matter how old you are. So, and at midnight, so as soon as we have the new year arrive, people toast with champagne after they listen to the kuranты, and then they exchange gifts. And sometimes Ded Moroz actually comes to the house on that night. And Ded Moroz and Snegurочка are often played by hired actors. And for young actors in Russia, New Year's Eve is a big night when they can make a lot of money by, being Ded Moroz and Snegurchka. And another interesting thing about the expectations for presents. So here in the United States, kids are supposed to behave the whole year to be on the good list and get the presents from Santa. In Russia, we don't have that kind of a tradition. All you really need to do is to recite a poem or sing a song or maybe do a little dance for the Ded Moroz and you get your presents. So yeah, so kids get their gifts just for performing. Now, another important thing about the New Year's night is the feast. Now, food is already incredibly important for the Russian culture, and it's super important for the New Year's night. So there's always a lot of food on the table because once again, there's this huge belief is that how you celebrate the New Year's night is how your year will go. So abundance on the table symbolizes the abundance in life in the new year. So I already mentioned champagne. It is the traditional celebratory drink. And usually people who don't even like drink alcohol will maybe sip or have like the non-alcoholic version because it's the toasting that's the tradition. And another thing I should have mentioned that before the midnight, there is also around 10 or 11 o'clock, people still sit down to eat something and toast to say goodbye to the old year, but not with champagne, but something else. Champagne is reserved for that moment when the new year arrives. So even before midnight, people might eat and reflect and toast the past year and the good things that happened there. But it's at midnight, once again, I start repeating myself, but like at midnight, they welcome the new year. And there's one dish that's definitely on every table in Russia is the salad called Olivier, kind of like the French name Oliver. And it's basically the Russian version of a potato salad. And there are like, just like with chili recipes here, there are like multiple variations and people argue passionately about what should be or shouldn't be on the Olivier. But it's pretty much the same recipe that everybody uses with some little variations. But the idea is like everyone makes it. It's like the tradition to have the Olivier salad on the New Year's night. And a lot of the times people make it in huge quantities, like big bowls, big pots, and then they eat it for several days after the New Year's celebration. Then, of course, you might see the red caviar or sometimes even black caviar if people can afford it. And another thing that you will always have on the tables is tangerines or clementines, or in Russian we call them mandarins. So this little fruit became a symbol of the new year sometime during the Soviet period. And they were brought to the European part of Russia, or Soviet Union, I'm sorry, from places like Armenia, Abkhazia, Azerbaijan, so from the Caucasus region. And in winter, in the European part of Russia, everything is kind of like dark and gray. And mandarine or tangerines are like this so bright and orange that they felt very festive. And little by little, they became this tradition to have them on the table for the new year. And actually, that symbolism was very interesting this year on the Moscow's most famous pedestrian street, the Arbat Street. This year, they had multiple installations of tangerines, as you can see on this slide right here. And it just shows how important this little fruit is for the Russian celebrations. Okay, and you probably can see on my slide that there's one more picture with something interesting going on there. And that's a tradition that everybody knows about. Not everybody does it, but definitely everybody knows it. Now, as I mentioned in some of my lectures before, Russians and overall the Russian culture is quite superstitious. And once again, New Year feels like this magical night where even your, craziest dreams can come true. So this tradition is connected to the currante. So while currante are ringing, people can write their most important wish on a piece of paper, burn that piece of paper, drop the ashes directly into the glass of champagne, and drink it before the chimes stop. So basically, everything has to happen while the bells are ringing, and if you manage to do it on time, the belief is that your wish will come true. Now, it's a little bit stressful. I actually did it a couple of times, but it is part of the magic of the New Year's night. Now, I do ask my students these questions. When do you think Russians put away their Christmas or New Year's trees? And, it was actually quite a culture shock for me how fast the Americans, put away their trees. I mean, like they're pretty much on the curve right after Christmas. A lot of people don't even wait for the new year. Now, in Russia, it's a little bit different. So remember how I said Russians celebrate New Year exactly when you guys celebrate it, but then Christmas is actually on January 7th. So we definitely have the New Year's tree throughout all this time. Now, you might think that after that, the tree finally comes down, but there is one more winter celebration in Russia, and it's called Old New Year, and it's celebrated on the night from January 13th to January 14th. Now, today is actually January 13th, so it is the Old New Year's Eve for the Russian people. Now, this date exists because the Russian Orthodox Church, as I mentioned before, continues to follow the Julian calendar, which is about 13 days behind the Gregorian calendar, which we use in regular life. So in church traditions, that is New Year. And once again, main celebrations are still the same calendar days as they are here. But there is another interesting cultural idea that's connected to the Old New Year. Russians place so much importance on the New Year celebration that if something doesn't go well on that night, and maybe something was disappointing or emotionally wrong, or people got sick, there is still a date to redo it all, to still have a good new year. So basically, you can redo your new year on the old new year if the new year didn't live up to your expectations. Now, overall, old new year is much quieter. There is usually less food, fewer guests, and usually people just celebrate it low-key with their family. And there is, once again, no gifts, very low-key, very cozy. People say Happy Old New Year, со старым Новым годом to each other, and that's basically enough. And another interesting thing is that this is a time to also celebrate with your colleagues at work, because in Russia, people get a very long New Year vacation. So they typically get about 9 to 10, sometimes even longer days off, starting on December 31st, sometimes December 30th, and lasting until around January 9th. Now, this year, people went back to work on January 12th, so yesterday. So there's a lot of downtime during this time, and when people finally return to work, they see each other, share stories about their new year, and they have this one more day to kind of like celebrate with each other at work, kind of like low-key, and that's the Old New Year. So that is, I think, I actually love Old New Year a lot, and this year I was sick with flu over the New Year, so I didn't get to celebrate how we usually do it. So tonight we are kind of going to be redoing some of it. So we have all of our traditions in place for the new year. Okay, we're almost done with this video. And just like at the end of my lecture, I show this slide to my students. I'm showing it to you too. And I'm asking, what do you think these dates mean? And students, think about it for a moment. You can also pause this video and think about it, but I will explain right away. As you know, and if you don't know, watch some other videos on my channel, but Russia has a huge number of different ethnic groups. Now, they're still all minorities, and Russian ethnicity is the majority, but there is still a great deal of ethnic and religious diversity in Russia, which is great. And you know that Russia overall is very culturally uniform, but over roughly the last couple of decades, so in the time of modern Russia, many ethnic communities in Russia have been actively reviving their traditional cultures, and that includes celebrating New Year according to their own calendars, beliefs, and seasonal cycle. So, for example, some nationalities, for example, Evenks and Yakuts, they celebrate New Year around June 21st, the summer solstice. And the celebrations, I will kind of like click through the video right now to show you little bits and pieces, and you will see how really like nationally or like ethnically diverse that is. And it's really cool, I think. But I will link all of the videos in the descriptions of this video. I highly recommend watching it because it's very, very interesting. So as you can see, other, for instance, Pomors, other ethnicities like Pomors celebrated on other dates. So for example, September 14th is the Pomors' New Year. And the idea for them is harvest, fire purification. As I'm clicking through it, you definitely can see that fire plays a very important role in this celebration. So, and then people in Chukotka celebrate the New Year on December 21st. And as I'm clicking through this video, I think you notice that their celebration is deeply connected to reindeer herding in kind of like Arctic life. So again, I'll link all of these in the description. Definitely watch them. They're very, very interesting. Okay, and I'm gonna finish this video by showing you this New Year's card from Russia. And you probably notice it has a horse, a fiery horse on it. Now it's very interesting. It's another interesting thing. First of all, people in Russia really believe in horoscopes. Now, not everyone, of course, but like overall culturally, horoscopes and kind of like believing in the signs of the zodiac is important. So for the Russian New Year, like Russians are aware that the changes of the zodiac years happens later, like in February with the Chinese New Year, but they kind of like merge these two traditions and celebrate the year of the animal already on the New Year's night. So everybody in Russia knows the year. So for example, right now we're finishing, or like we're finishing the year of the snake, and the next year is the year of the horse. So Russians like to kind of like celebrate according with the traditions of like what to wear for the horse, what the horse likes to eat. So that's kind of like another interesting fun fact. Again, not everybody follows it, but like everybody knows which animal year that is. And it's gonna be the horse next year. And I guess I'm at the end of my video. I hope you found it interesting. I think the most important thing that I was trying to convey in this video, I mean, I did talk about the traditions, but I think one of the most important things to understand about the Russian culture is that New Year is not about celebration, or not just about the celebration. It's really about hope and reset and some kind of emotional survival, in the new year. So if you have people in your life who are Russian or who share the Russian speaking culture, please believe me when I say the New Year's night is very, very important for them. And I think it's sometimes hard for Westerners to understand it because you put a lot more emphasis on the Christmas. But I hope this video explained why the New Year celebrations are so important for the Russian culture. Okay, thank you so much. Please add a comment if you like this video or add some questions. Okay, bye-bye.